The forest was colder than usual that October evening, and a soft fog drifted like pale ghosts between the trees. 15-year-old Arya Morgan tightened the straps on her backpack as her Belgian Malinois, Shadow, brushed against her leg, alert and restless. They had taken this trail hundreds of times during training sessions, but something felt different tonight, like the woods were holding secrets in their breath. The sun was setting faster than expected, coating the landscape in the last shades of orange and gold. Arya paused, listening, because Shadow had suddenly stopped and lifted his head, ears sharp, body stiff. Shadow's low growl vibrated through the stillness, and Arya laid a calming hand on his head. She whispered, "What do you hear, boy?" But even she sensed something. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind. It was a feeling like danger was close, pressing against the air itself. Arya had lived in the town of Pinewood her whole life, and she had never heard the forest this silent. Shadow tugged forward, pulling her deeper down the path, his instincts overriding all hesitation. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest felt. The air smelled wrong, like gasoline mixed with burning rubber. Arya's heartbeat quickened as she realized this wasn't normal smoke drifting from a campfire. It was heavier, invasive, wrapping itself around her ribcage like a warning. Shadow barked sharply, a loud, cutting sound that shot through the quiet and echoed between the trees. Arya followed him as he veered off the trail, pushing past branches that clawed at her jacket. As they moved, the smoke thickened, and Arya covered her nose with her sleeve. The ground was charred in patches, like small fires had been lit and stomped out. But the strangest part was that the embers were fresh, still glowing faintly under the fading daylight. Shadow stopped suddenly and gave a loud, urgent bark, one Arya had only ever heard during search and rescue drills. Her pulse raced because this wasn't training, and there shouldn't have been anyone out here. Then she heard it. A scream. Not loud, but stretched with agony, muffled by smoke and trees. Arya felt her blood run cold. Shadow bolted toward the sound, and she sprinted after him, branches snapping under her feet. The smell of gasoline grew stronger until it was overwhelming. And then she saw something flicker through the thick haze, orange flames cutting through darkness like the eyes of a monster. When Arya reached the clearing, she froze in horror. A police SUV lay overturned, crushed against a fallen tree, its windows shattered and its hood engulfed in flames. A man, no, an officer, was pinned halfway out the driver's side, his uniform scorched, his cries fading into ragged groans. Arya's breath caught as she whispered, "Oh my God, Shadow, stay close." The flames crawled dangerously close to the officer's legs, licking at his boots like hungry predators. Shadow barked, circling the man, assessing the scene with desperate urgency. Arya rushed to the officer's side, her hands trembling as she tried to pull away the debris trapping him. His face was covered in soot, blood trailing down the side of his forehead, his badge barely visible beneath the burnt fabric. He stared at her through half-lidded eyes and whispered, "Help, please, they're coming back." Arya didn't understand what he meant, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. The officer coughed violently, trying to speak again. "They set the fire, tried to burn me alive." His voice cracked with pain. Arya felt a surge of determination as adrenaline shot through her veins. She pulled harder, using her entire body weight, trying to free him from the twisted metal. But the flames roared louder, spreading across the grass like something was feeding them intentionally. Shadow suddenly ran toward Arya's backpack, grabbed the emergency rope she always carried for training exercises, and brought it to her. She blinked in shock, tears forming because the dog understood the danger better than she did. "Good boy," she whispered, voice shaking. "We can do this." She looped the rope around one of the metal bars pressing against the officer and anchored the other end to a tree trunk. Arya pulled with everything she had, legs shaking, body straining, breath breaking in shallow gasps. The metal gradually bent, screeching painfully as Shadow tugged alongside her, his strong muscles straining. The officer's body finally shifted enough to be dragged free, and Arya pulled him away from the fire, inch by inch across the dirt. His screams echoed through the forest, each one piercing her heart like a blade. Once they were a safe distance away, Arya knelt beside him and inspected his burns. They were severe, his legs blistered, his uniform melted to his skin in places. The officer gritted his teeth, tears mixing with soot. "You saved my life," he whispered weakly. "I'm Officer Daniel Hale, thank you, Arya shook her head and said, "Don't thank me yet. We need to get you out of here." Shadow stiffened suddenly, growling deep and low. Arya followed his gaze, and her blood froze. 3 men emerged from the trees, their faces covered with bandanas, their clothes stained with soot, and in their hands were Molotov cocktails. One of them laughed darkly when he saw Arya. Well, looks like someone found our little project." Arya felt her heart slam painfully in her chest. The officer, barely conscious, whispered with terror, "Run, they're the ones, they'll kill you," but Arya stayed, placing herself between the attackers and the injured man. The tallest man twirled the bottle of gasoline like a toy. "Too bad," he sneered. "We can't let you leave after seeing this. The forest was supposed to go up in flames tonight, and no little girl is going to ruin that." Arya's knees trembled, but she didn't back down. Shadow positioned himself in front of her, teeth bared, a deep growl rumbling like thunder warning of a coming storm. The men smirked, clearly not taking a dog seriously. One of them lifted his arm to throw the bottle. Shadow moved faster than eyes could track. He lunged at the man's wrist, clamping down with bone-crushing precision. The man screamed, dropping the Molotov, which shattered harmlessly onto the dirt. Arya grabbed the officer's radio, her fingers shaking as she pressed the emergency button. Static crackled, then a voice responded, "This is dispatch." "Who is this?" Arya shouted, "Officer down. He's burned, he's being attacked. Send help to the east ridge of Pinewood Forest." The men recovered quickly, rage darkening their eyes. The leader snarled, "Take the girl first." Arya felt terror flood her veins as one of them charged toward her. She grabbed a fallen branch and swung it wildly, landing a hit that made him stumble. But he kept coming, fury radiating off him like heat. Shadow leapt again, knocking the man off balance and sinking his teeth into his sleeve, preventing him from grabbing Arya. The officer groaned, struggling to stay conscious. "Kid, don't fight them, they're dangerous, get out," but Arya refused to abandon him. Instead, she grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it at the second attacker, striking him in the shoulder. He growled in pain, stumbling back as Shadow circled defensively. Arya took the officer's arm, trying to drag him further away, but he was too heavy, and her muscles screamed in protest. The first man recovered and stomped toward her with a switchblade in hand, eyes filled with murderous intent. Arya froze, breath caught in her throat. She felt the world spinning, fear clawing inside her chest. But Shadow didn't hesitate. He lunged again, this time straight at the man's throat. The attacker panicked, stumbling back and dropping the knife as Shadow forced him to the ground. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. But the attackers heard them too. The leader cursed loudly. "We can't get caught here, we need to finish this later. Grab the stuff and move." The men scrambled back into the trees, disappearing as fast as they had appeared. Arya collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Shadow returned to her side, licking her wrist as if to reassure her she was not alone, even though her entire body trembled violently. The officer coughed weakly. They were going to burn the entire forest, and then the town. The dry season made it perfect. Arya's eyes widened in horror. They wanted to destroy Pinewood. He nodded painfully. "I caught them trying to plant accelerants, they ambushed me before I could call it in." Arya felt the weight of his words settle like cold stones in her stomach. The sirens grew louder, brighter, closer. Red and blue lights sliced through the fog as 2 police trucks and a fire engine burst into the clearing. Officers jumped out, yelling commands, rushing to secure the scene. Paramedics sprinted toward Arya and the injured officer, dropping to their knees beside him. One medic examined his burns and said urgently, "We need to get him to the hospital, now." Chief Lawson, a tall, stern-looking man with gray hair and a grave expression, knelt beside Arya. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her hands still shook uncontrollably. "Those men, they tried to kill him. They wanted to burn the forest and the town." Lawson nodded grimly. "We heard your radio call. You saved Officer Hale's life and probably the whole town." Arya looked down at her soot-covered clothes and trembling fingers. She didn't feel brave, she felt terrified, overwhelmed, shaken to her core. But Shadow pressed against her leg, grounding her. Lawson placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're a hero, Arya. And that dog of yours, he's something special." Arya swallowed hard, tears finally breaking loose and sliding down her cheeks. As the paramedics loaded Officer Hale into the ambulance, he reached out weakly toward Arya. She stepped forward, taking his hand as gently as she could. He whispered, "Your courage saved me." Arya shook her head, her voice trembling. "We just found you." But he gave a faint smile. "No, you fought for me. You didn't run." The ambulance doors closed, and the sirens wailed as it sped away. Officers combed the forest, searching for signs of the attackers and the accelerants they left behind. Arya sat on the back of a fire truck, wrapped in a blanket, Shadow lying at her feet like a guardian made of muscle and loyalty. Every breath she took felt heavy with everything she'd seen. Everything she had survived. After nearly an hour, Chief Lawson returned, his face troubled. "It's worse than we thought," he said, crouching beside her. "They planted fire triggers all across the East Ridge. If they had gone off, the entire town would have been in flames before we even knew." Arya looked at him in shock, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, Shadow and we stopped it." Lawson nodded slowly. "You didn't just save one life tonight. You saved thousands." Arya felt the magnitude of it wash over her like a wave too big to stand against. She leaned into Shadow, burying her face in his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, sobbing into his warm coat. "You saved them. You saved everyone." Shadow exhaled softly, resting his head on her lap, as if he understood the world had shifted tonight. The forest slowly returned to quiet as dawn began to creep across the horizon. Officers finished clearing the area, extinguishing small leftover fires, securing the evidence. Lawson walked Arya and Shadow to his truck. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you home. Your parents are worried sick." Arya nodded, her legs unsteady but moving. When they reached town, a crowd had already gathered outside her house. Neighbors, firefighters, officers, everyone whispered, pointing at her, eyes filled with awe and relief. Arya's mother ran to her, pulling her into a crushing embrace. "Oh God, Arya, I thought something happened to you." Her father placed a trembling hand on her cheek, pride filling his eyes. "You're our brave girl." Shadow wagged his tail as people knelt to pet him, tears shining in their eyes. Word spread quickly about what Arya and Shadow had done. Strangers hugged her. Officers shook her hand. The mayor himself arrived, his voice emotional as he said, "You saved Pinewood. You saved us all." Arya didn't know what to say. She simply looked at Shadow, knowing he had been her strength, her courage, her miracle in the darkness. Days passed, and recovery efforts began across the forest. Officer Hale remained in the hospital, but doctors said he would survive thanks to the girl who pulled him from fire and death. Arya visited him often, Shadow by her side. Hale always reached out to scratch the dog's head and whisper, "My guardian angel." Arya smiled shyly every time, though her eyes still clouded with the memories of that night. But Pinewood wouldn't let her carry the weight alone. They organized a ceremony in her honor, a gathering in the town square with music, flags, and tears. When Arya walked onto the stage with Shadow trotting proudly beside her, the entire town stood and applauded with thunderous gratitude. The mayor presented her with a medal for bravery, while Shadow received a custom-made K9 hero collar engraved with the words, "Protector of Pinewood." As Arya looked over the crowd, she felt her heart swell with emotion. People who once barely knew her now looked at her with admiration and love. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I just did what anyone would have done, because this town is my home." But the crowd disagreed, and their applause shook her to her core. After the ceremony, as the sun dipped below the horizon and Pinewood's lights glowed warmly, Arya sat on a quiet bench with Shadow beside her. She stroked his fur, whispering, "We did something big, didn't we?" Shadow nudged her hand gently, his eyes glowing with loyalty and affection. Arya breathed deeply, the forest scent now peaceful again. A miracle had unfolded in those burning woods, and somehow, she had become part of it. Officer Hale later joined her, walking slowly on crutches but alive, healed, grateful. He sat beside her, gazing at the peaceful town glowing in the night. "You didn't just save my life, Arya," he said softly. "You saved my family. You saved my future. And you saved this entire town." Arya blinked back tears, unable to speak. Hale smiled gently. "You're stronger than you think." Arya looked up at the stars, remembering the smoke, the flames, the fear, and then Shadow standing between her and death. She realized something profound. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about loving something enough to fight for it. Pinewood wasn't just her home. It was her heart. And that night, she and Shadow protected it with everything they had. The forest healed slowly, but so did Arya. Her nightmares faded. Her strength grew. Her bond with Shadow deepened into something unbreakable. As months passed, people still whispered the story of the brave girl and her fearless dog who stopped a fire big enough to erase an entire town. It became legend, told around campfires, in classrooms, in the quiet moments when courage was needed. Arya never sought praise, but the story lived on because it reminded people of something powerful. Even in the darkest forest, even in the hottest fire, even in the deepest fear, a single act of courage can save everything. And so, the town of Pinewood slept peacefully each night, knowing their guardian wasn't a soldier, or a superhero, or a mythical being, but a 15-year-old girl and her loyal Belgian Malinois. A girl named Arya, a dog named Shadow, and a night when two hearts, brave and unbroken, saved an entire town from burning alive.